and geopolitical analyst. Richard, long day, huh?
Oh, no dull day in the Philippines. No, kakabalik ko lang from down under and in retrospect, parang boring ng buhay doon. Everything is good, everything is nice, no pollution, quality of food. Actually, now I'm looking if ano maging speech ni Tatay Digong, no, former President Rodrigo Duterte. I doubt that he's not gonna come out and potentially with guns blazing in response to the fragmentation and total disintegration of the unit team. I also wonder if the First Lady will also have an addendum to that. In fact, some people are making fun if there'll be a especially for you. Wait, sa kabilang channel pala yan. Edition on this. But going back to this discussion,
Okay,
this
okay.
was a slow motion train wreck. This was a slow motion train wreck. We saw this coming. In fact, in 2021, before even the election started, I wrote a piece about how House of Duterte and House of Marcos were about to clash because both Sara Duterte and Marcos wanted to run for the top position. And eventually, because of divisions within the House of Duterte, meaning Duterte wanting Bongo to run, Sara was not happy with the situation, Marcos came on top. So it was really a tactical alliance to begin with. So if there's at least one occasion where I completely agree with Sara in terms of sincerity of her statement, it's when she said the unity was really for election purposes. So I think she really laid down the predicate just a few days before officially ending itong mother of all hugot kind of speech. What I found interesting is if you rewind to 2018, wasn't it? 2017 or 20, when Leni Robredo resigned or was forced to resign, essentially driven out of the cabinet of Duterte, the father of the current vice president, ganon din yung approach na. Medyo malumanay, parang lumalabas na siya pa yung victim. And Sara Duterte did not articulate it, but I think what she was implying here, I'm trying to read what she was implying, is that dahil sa politika, naapektuhan yung kanyang abilidad to execute her job in the best way possible. And let's be honest, you look at all sorts of studies, the latest PISA rankings on all fronts, the education sector in the Philippines is also a slow motion train wreck. So in a way, you could say maybe this is our heroic sacrifice, or at least that will be the narrative that her side will try to drive, aside from blaming President Marcos. But President Marcos can also come out of this with complete plausible deniability and say, on my side, I was always her number one fan. I always supported them. I believe in unity. I'm grateful to her. And whatever she chooses, that's her choice. But he can easily say na hindi ako yung nagpaalis sa kanya. Siya mismo ang taos puso na nag-resign dito. So I think there's some room here for this attrition warfare to continue, but not all-out war kaagad yet.
It's going to be a battle of the spin doctors. I found it interesting that even though she didn't give a reason, everyone understands that this is a very much a political thing. The first thing I want to know from you is, do you agree, as what everyone has, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have been saying, is that this is the start of her being rebranded as the face of the opposition?
Well, I mean, we know that there are clear policy differences between Sara Duterte and the family on one hand, and Marcos, and clearly one of them is the West Philippine Sea issue, right? I mean, she's quite infamous, or some would say famous, for the no comment essentially position on the whole West Philippine Sea issue. So actually, from an administrative operational standpoint, I wonder how comfortable Marcos would be discussing a very strong anti-China position when it comes to national security issues with Sara Duterte being around. So probably it made sense for her to no longer be in the cabinet, considering the high stakes of the differences here. Now, is she going to be the face of the opposition? It will depend on the traditional opposition. We understand that the traditional opposition is divided in between what I call never Marcos versus never Duterte. So there are groups in the opposition who are saying, no. When it comes to these two dynasties, our bigger concern are the Dutertes, and we have to make sure that the Dutertes will never claw their way back to the Malacanang. And they were the ultimate also train wreck, I mean, word of the day, for Philippine democracy. But there are also many in the opposition who are in the never Marcos, the never again movement. And for them, Marcos Jr. is still a threat to our democracy, and that Dutertes are now a distraction. So I think the traditional opposition is quite divided, but I wouldn't be surprised there would be multiple oppositions in the coming months and, of course, ahead of the next year's election. So you have to make a distinction between ideological opposition, traditional opposition on one hand, and effectively the new opposition because of political differences and the disintegration of the unity team. Of course, sarcastically, I would say there's also the opposition of naging opposition dahil hindi binigyan ng position, right? There are also those kind of people who are waiting for their axe to grind as the election comes in.
Hey, Richard, do you think that this was really the product of a slow progression of events as we laid it down for you? Or do you think this was more planned? Because if you take a look at the timing, it is 6 months before election period, mid-January. Filing of candidacies is October 1 to 8. I mean, she is vice president, but also, I mean, assembling a strong opposition lineup in the lead to the 2028 polls. We know the 2025 polls also counts very much. I mean, what do you see here? Was
Right.
there a specific
point.
tipping point?
Right,
Or-
good question. I think, I don't know kung nakinig si Marcos at Malacanang sa mga vlogs namin, but the issue of Grand Coalition came up earlier this month when President Marcos Jr. discussed the possibility of a coalition of different parties as part of the administration ticket come 2025. And guess what? Hindi kasamang hukbong. And definitely hindi kasama ang PDP Laban, at least yung faction ni Cuisi and Rodrigo Duterte. So I think 3 months earlier already, there was a signal that Sara Duterte or the whole Duterte camp will not be part of the administration. So I'm not sure how can you say this was all planned, because what was happening here was really a back and forth ping pong, right? There were times when the Dutertes took on the offensive position. Look at President Duterte going all guns blazing earlier this year, questioning the president's competence and even more. And then there were times that Marcos and sometimes the First Lady also pushed back quite aggressively. So it has been a ping pong between the two houses. And I think eventually right now, the battle lines are pretty much drawn. And to be fair to Sara Duterte, you know, she was in a boiling frog situation, right? The more she waited and the more she stayed inside the cabinet, the more she was going to be cornered and bogged down. So I think it makes sense for her to have some time to prepare as the de facto leader of not necessarily the opposition, but at least one of the major oppositions to the administration come 2025. But as we know in the Philippines, unlike in the United States or other flagship democracies, midterms tend to be pro-incumbency, given the momentum of the incumbency, given the resources of the state. So Sara, if she ever becomes the face of the opposition, will be coming in from a position of relative weakness. Although they have a couple of pretty strong candidates for the Senate, including her brother, Baste, or if not, the two brothers, based on some of the preliminary surveys we're looking at.
Richard, I think it's important to note that this is the third consecutive administration where the vice president quit the cabinet of the Philippine president.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I didn't
So-
even realize that.
How might the resignations of former vice presidents Binay and Robredo compare or contrast to this one of VP Sara?
Yeah, I mean, the vice presidency is probably one of the most perilous positions in the Philippines. Sarcastically, it has been dismissed as a spare tire. But at the same time, it's also the office that is a heartbeat away from the presidency. And once you're a vice president, you're assumed to be essentially the top candidate to succeed the current president. That's why even in the United States, as we speak right now, Trump is scratching his head if he's going to get kind of a charismatic person to be his vice president, but not too charismatic to overshadow him. So imagine this is happening in the US when the vice president run under one ticket. So in the Philippines, when actually the two positions are contested separately, and the tendency is most of the time it's not based on a uniteam, although we had the Noibi in 2010 and now the uniteam, it is quite assumed that there'll always be some tension, and management of that tension will always be very, very difficult. And this time, it was really just untenable. I think this was almost inevitable if you look at how things have turned out. So that's why, you know, for people who want to be the president, maybe you want to sit out the vice presidency. It's a very, very perilous position. For a while, the vice presidents from Erap to Arroyo had a good shot of being presidents, but actually, essentially, the 21st century has not been good to Filipino vice presidents. So it's the last political position I will recommend to anyone who wants really the highest office. But then again, it's also a heartbeat away from the presidency, so the temptations are probably too strong
Richard,
for some people to pass on.
Gusto ko malaman yung reaction mo dun sa speech ni Vice President. I did see your tweet. Sabi mo, anong sabi niya? I mean, tell us candidly. How did you find that speech? What did you observe?
Well, I mean,
wasn't
I
much
just
to go
check the
by.
comment sections. I mean, I sometimes, you know, I just post stuff to see the comments, because the comments are a field day to me in terms of the Zarzuela of comments. For me, I could see the struggle of the vice president. I'm kidding aside. I'm quite sarcastic, obviously, on Twitter. There are nicer versions of me elsewhere. No, I think she was really struggling because she didn't want to come out as bitter. She didn't want to come out as ungrateful. She didn't want to come out as power hungry. So weirdly, she came out kind of like Lenny. So
Oh,
you just put side-to-side speech of
Why don't she
Leni
was
Robredo
managing
and
her
speech ni Sara
emotions?
Duterte.
Yeah.
They kind of come off quite similar, which is, for me, another irony.
Which is the
Maybe that's what the
safest
vice
road to
president
take,
does to you.
right? It's the
Bumabait ka sa
safest
office na yan.
kasi, oh.
Nakakabait ang vice presidency sa Pilipinas.
I want to come back to you saying that she isn't coming at this from a strong position. That makes her a bit more vulnerable now. So, what are her options from here? Midterms is coming up, as we were just saying. Does she run for Congress? Does her brother run for Congress? Do they consolidate their base there?
Can she resign as vice president
and
then
run?
run?
What are her feasible options from here?
Yeah, we are in uncharted territories. I mean, if you look at the Philippine politics today, we're kind of like the Berlin of, like new Cold War is here. U.S.-China competition. There's also the great power competition. Then there could be the ICC element in the near future, if we were to believe some of the people who claim to have access or understanding of the timetable of ICC. Then there are the investigations against Duterte. So the Dutertes are really in a very tough position. They're quite cornered. And when you corner a very rambunctious and ferocious political dynasty like Duterte's, I won't be surprised they will pull off some crazy, out of the box unorthodox counter move. So I won't be completely shocked if suddenly she even decides to, I don't know, run back in Davao, right? To just give up the vice presidency, because at this time the vice president is like an empty shell, right? And her strategic depth is back in Davao. And if Basta Duterte runs for the higher office, if Polong runs for the higher office, who's going to be back home and to protect the rear guard? Because let's not kid ourselves. The other side is potentially also pushing for their rivals in Davao to make inroads into the Duterte camp. So they're going to be in this kind of a, I don't know, this could be like a battle of Waterloo. Like it could come from all different directions. So if you imagine, I have no envy for the position that Sara Duterte finds herself in right now. At the same time, I'm the last person to underestimate them. I think they made many strategic mistakes. I think there was a lot of hubris in a lot of their positioning. I think Marcos quietly cut them to the size, but they're not done. So I agree that tapos na yung first chapter. So I think this was the final act of a 3-4 act part. But we're now moving to second chapter. So abangan, there'll be more plot twists, and looking forward to joining you guys for breaking this down more.
We're running out of time, but just very quickly, I wonder if you have thoughts on what happens to where Senator Amy Marcos naman will go from here. She's also caught in a very tight position. She's the one who convinced Sara to run alongside her brother. We know she's very close to VP Sara. At the same time, we also know that she has a bit of a rift with the president. Where does this leave her?
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, of all major figures, she's probably the most, squeezed in between, considering everything. But, you could say always blood is thicker than, political alliance. But you can also say, Filipino politicians, my goodness, especially veteran politicians, are master navigators. I don't think they'll have much problem navigating this latest fault line. And let's be honest, I think this was coming for quite some time. Not to mention, I think, remember, Baste a few months ago also, threw some shades at Amy Marcos or something like that. So I'm not worried for her making the necessary adjustments. And if you're Amy Marcos right now, you're going to be very, very practical. Because if you look at the surveys, I think she's barely in the top 5 or 6. And it's really the top 4 or 5 who are runaway in terms of their numbers. The next 15 to 20 candidates are actually competitive. So I think Amy Marcos is going to be very, very practical in her calculation in the coming months if she wants to regain that seat or be reelected with seat in Senate.
Richard,
sense.
final question on this topic. What is your grade for the Vice President as Education Secretary? If you can, give us a grade.
Is this the fast talk part?
And who do you think can replace her?
What name?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, I half sarcastically joked that maybe Leni could be the next president, and that would be a poetic justice. But I doubt. I know Leni's going to run for I think mayor or governor office or local government office. I agree with my former colleague in LaSalle, Professor Contreras, that this is where Marcos has the chance for a strategic decision, and he can strike at 2 birds with 1 stone by giving this position to someone like Balisacan, right? If you look at Secretary Balisacan, he also worked in President Aquino's cabinet, not necessarily yellow or belong to the opposition, but someone who's very